The neon lights of Zephyr Station cast strange shadows across the grimy metal floor where Marcus sat with his worn guitar case open before him. His fingers moved across the strings with practiced ease, pulling melodies from an instrument that had seen better decades. The music echoed through the alien marketplace, a human sound in a decidedly non-human place. Station dwellers hurried past without a second glance. Tall Crystal and Vorthak clicked their way across the deck plates with dismissive chittering. The slug-like Mallory oozed around him, their eye stalks swiveling away as if his very presence offended them. Even the robotic synthetics seemed programmed to avoid the ragged human sitting against the bulkhead. Marcus had been on Zephyr Station for 3 months now, ever since his transport ship had broken down and left him stranded. His credits had run out weeks ago, and pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. The guitar was all he had left of his old life, back when he had been somebody important, back when humans still mattered in this corner of the galaxy. A group of young Catherian traders approached, their purple skin gleaming under the artificial lights. They wore expensive biosuits that shifted colors with their moods, currently displaying patterns of amusement and disgust. Their leader, a tall female with ornate cranial ridges, stopped directly in front of Marcus and spoke in perfect galactic standard. "Look at this pathetic creature," she announced to her companions, her voice carrying the musical quality typical of her species. "It thinks it can exchange noise for sustenance. How quaint." Marcus continued playing, his weathered hands never missing a beat. The melody was an old Earth ballad, something his grandmother had taught him before the war took everything familiar away. The notes seemed to hang in the recycled air of the station, defying the cold metal and synthetic atmosphere around them. "Seriously, though," the Catherian continued, her biosuit now pulsing with entertainment patterns, "this has to be some kind of joke. Play for food? What kind of primitive barter system is this supposed to be?" Her companions laughed, their harmonious voices creating an almost musical mockery. One of them, a younger male, stepped closer and examined Marcus with the kind of clinical interest reserved for studying insects. "I heard humans used to have something called art before they lost their homeworld," the young Catherian said. "Perhaps this is some kind of cultural remnant, like watching extinct species in a zoo." Marcus finished the song and looked up at them for the first time. His eyes were tired but not broken, blue as Earth's lost oceans and holding depths that made the Catherians unconsciously step back. He had learned long ago that showing weakness to aliens only invited more cruelty. "Food would be nice," Marcus said simply, his voice carrying a quiet strength that seemed at odds with his ragged appearance. "But I'm not playing for charity. I'm playing because music matters, whether you understand it or not." The lead Catherian's biosuit flashed with indignation. In her culture, anything that could not be quantified, measured, or converted into profit was worthless. The concept that someone would create something beautiful simply because it needed to exist was alien to her in ways that transcended species. "Music matters?" she scoffed, her cranial ridges darkening with amusement. "To whom? Look around you, human. Do you see anyone stopping? Do you see anyone caring about your primitive noise-making?" As if to emphasize her point, a massive Grokan merchant stomped past, his forelegs carrying him with the grace of a small earthquake. His trunk-like snout briefly turned toward the music, but he continued on his way without breaking stride. The station's background hum of commerce and conversation continued unabated around them. Marcus began another song, this one faster and more complex. His fingers danced across the strings with surprising speed, creating harmonies that seemed to weave through the mechanical sounds of the station. The melody was human in origin but somehow universal in its appeal, speaking to emotions that transcended species barriers. "You want to know why music matters?" Marcus asked without looking up from his instrument. "Because in a universe full of creatures who measure everything by profit and efficiency, someone needs to remember that beauty exists for its own sake." The Catherian female felt something strange stirring in her chest, an unfamiliar resonance that her biosuit couldn't quite categorize. The music was doing something to her emotional regulators, creating patterns she had never experienced before. Her companions were experiencing similar confusion, their own biosuits flickering through colors they had never displayed. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Noise cannot have inherent value. There must be some kind of neurological manipulation involved." Marcus smiled for the first time since they had approached him. It was not a bitter smile or a sarcastic one, but something genuine and warm that transformed his weathered features entirely. In that moment, the Cytherians caught a glimpse of what humans had been before desperation and exile had worn them down. "Sit down," Marcus said, patting the deck beside him. "Let me show you something your biosuits can't measure." The Cytherian female stared at the human in disbelief. Her biosuit cycled through rapid patterns of confusion and indignation as she processed his audacious invitation. No lower caste being had ever dared speak to her with such casual confidence, let alone suggest she lower herself to his level. "You cannot be serious," she said, her musical voice hitting notes that would have been beautiful if not for the contempt they carried. "I am Lyrelai of the Cytherian Trade Consortium. I do not sit on dirty station floors with destitute aliens." Marcus continued playing, his melody shifting to something softer and more inviting. The notes seemed to wrap around the group like invisible threads, creating a pocket of calm in the chaotic marketplace around them. Several passers-by had begun to slow their pace, though they tried to appear disinterested. "Your loss," Marcus replied with a shrug that somehow managed to convey infinite patience. "The view from down here is different. You might see things you've never noticed before." The young male Cytherian took a hesitant step forward, his cranial ridges brightening with curiosity. His biosuit displayed the swirling patterns that indicated internal conflict between social conditioning and genuine interest. "Lyrelai," he said quietly, "perhaps we could spare a few moments. For research purposes, of course. Understanding primitive cultures might prove profitable in future negotiations." Lyrelai's biosuit flashed with annoyance, but Marcus could see the calculation behind her eyes. The Cytherian mind was always working angles, looking for advantages. If she could frame this encounter as a business opportunity, her pride would allow her to participate. "5 minutes," she announced, as if granting a great favor, "but I will not sit on this filthy floor." To everyone's surprise, including her own companions, Lyrelai gracefully folded her legs and settled onto the deck beside Marcus. Her biosuit immediately began generating a subtle energy field to protect her from direct contact with the station's surfaces, but she was sitting nonetheless. The young male quickly joined her, followed more reluctantly by the other 2 Cytherians in their group. They arranged themselves in a small semicircle around Marcus, their expensive clothing and natural elegance making them look like exotic birds that had somehow found themselves in a junkyard. "Now what?" Lyrelai asked, her impatience evident despite her attempt to appear scholarly. "What earth-shattering revelation were you planning to share with us?" Marcus transitioned into a new song, one that started as barely a whisper of sound. His fingers moved with deliberate slowness, building the melody note by careful note. The Cytherians found themselves leaning forward unconsciously, straining to catch every nuance of the developing composition. "Listen," Marcus said simply, "not with your biosuits or your profit calculations or your social hierarchies. Just listen." As the music grew, something extraordinary began to happen. The chaotic sounds of the station began to form a pattern around Marcus's melody. The rhythmic clanging of a nearby repair droid provided percussion. The hiss of pneumatic doors created a counterpoint. Even the varied alien voices in the marketplace seemed to find harmony with the human's simple guitar. The Cytherians watched in fascination as their biosuits began displaying colors they had never seen before. The patterns were wild and unstructured, flowing like liquid light across their skin. Their emotional regulators, designed to maintain perfect psychological balance, were struggling to categorize what they were experiencing. "What is happening to us?" whispered the young male, staring at his hands as they pulsed with unprecedented hues. "You're feeling music," Marcus explained, his voice barely audible above his playing. "Not analyzing it or profiting from it or measuring its efficiency, just experiencing it as it was meant to be experienced." A small crowd had begun to gather around them, drawn by the unusual sight of wealthy Cytherians sitting on the deck with a human beggar. Broken merchants paused in their negotiations. Vorthak traders stopped their incessant clicking. Even a few synthetics tilted their heads in apparent curiosity. Lyrelai felt tears forming in her eyes, a physiological response she had not experienced since childhood. Her biosuit was frantically trying to regulate her emotional state, but the music was bypassing all of her species' technological safeguards and speaking directly to something primal within her. "This is impossible," she murmured, but her words carried wonder rather than disbelief. My people eliminated such chaotic emotional responses centuries ago. We are evolved beyond this. Marcus's fingers found a particularly beautiful passage, and the melody soared above the station's mechanical symphony. As it did, something magical happened. Other sounds began to join in deliberately. A Mallory merchant's breathing apparatus created a rhythmic wheeze that matched the tempo. A group of young Vorthak began clicking in harmony. Even the station's environmental system seemed to pulse in time with the music. Maybe, Marcus said gently, evolution isn't about eliminating the things that make us feel alive. Maybe it's about learning to feel them more deeply. The young Catherian was openly weeping now, his biosuit giving up all pretense of emotional regulation. The colors flowing across his skin were beautiful beyond description, like aurora borealis made manifest in living tissue. I can see why they fear you, Lyrelai said suddenly, her voice filled with a new understanding. Your species, I mean. This thing you do, this music, it's dangerous. Marcus raised an eyebrow but continued playing. Dangerous how? It makes us remember, she replied, her own biosuit now displaying patterns of such complexity that nearby Catherians stopped to stare. It makes us remember what we gave up to become efficient, what we sacrificed to become profitable. The crowd around them had grown larger, and Marcus noticed that beings who had never spoken to each other were standing side by side. All of them caught up in the same inexplicable moment of connection. The music had created something that the station's rigid social hierarchies and species divisions could not touch. Food would still be nice, Marcus said with a gentle smile, never breaking rhythm. But this is why music really matters. The music continued to weave its spell across the growing crowd, but Marcus noticed the change before anyone else. The harmonious sounds that had spontaneously emerged from the station's background noise were being systematically disrupted. Security drones descended from their ceiling alcoves with mechanical precision, their scanning beams cutting through the gathered beings like cold knives. Attention, citizens, a synthesized voice announced through the station's communication system. You are participating in an unlicensed gathering. Disperse immediately or face detention for violation of Station Regulation 847C. The crowd began to scatter with practiced efficiency, each species reverting to their default behavioral patterns. The Grokon merchants resumed their heavy trudging. The Vorthak clicked away in agitated clusters. Even the synthetics retracted into their standard operational modes, the brief moment of curiosity extinguished by programmed compliance. But the Catherians remained seated. Their biosuits had stabilized into new patterns none of them had ever seen before, and they seemed reluctant to break the spell that Marcus's music had created. Lyrelai stared at the approaching security drones with a mixture of defiance and confusion. We should leave, the young male whispered, his voice still thick with emotion. The station authority does not tolerate disruptions to commercial operations. Marcus continued playing, but his melody shifted to something more defiant. The notes rang out against the metal bulkheads like a challenge, refusing to be silenced by bureaucratic threats. His weathered hands moved with renewed purpose as if the music itself was demanding to be heard. Let them come, he said quietly, his blue eyes fixed on the lead security drone. Music doesn't require a license. The drone descended until it hovered directly above their small group, its sensors scanning each individual in turn. When it reached Marcus, its scan lingered for several long seconds, as if trying to categorize something that didn't fit into its programming parameters. Human designation, Marcus Chen, the drone announced in its flat, emotionless voice. Status, vagrant. Criminal record, none. Current violation, unlicensed performance in commercial sector. Cease activity immediately. Lyrelai stood slowly, her biosuit now displaying patterns that Marcus had never seen on any Catherian. They were colors of authority and power, but mixed with something softer that spoke of recent transformation. When she spoke, her voice carried the commanding tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Security Unit 7749, she said, reading the drone's identification number with casual precision. I am Lyrelai of the Catherian Trade Consortium. This human is providing cultural consultation services to my delegation. We have full commercial authorization for this sector. The drone's sensors swiveled to focus on her, running what Marcus assumed were extensive background checks. The mechanical hum of its processors filled the silence as the remaining crowd watched nervously from a safe distance. Verification confirms identity. Lirelai Catherian Trade Consortium Executive Level 9. However, no consultation contract is registered with Station Authority. Please provide documentation. Marcus stopped playing for the first time since the drones had arrived. The sudden silence felt oppressive after the beauty of the music, like a light had been extinguished. He looked up at Lirelai with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. The contract was arranged verbally, Lirelai continued smoothly, her biosuit now pulsing with confidence patterns, as is customary for preliminary cultural assessments. I will file the appropriate documentation within standard timeframes. The young Catherian stared at her in amazement, his own biosuit flickering with admiration and disbelief. What Lirelai was doing was not technically illegal, but it was unprecedented. High-level Catherian executives did not fabricate stories to protect vagrant aliens. The security drone processed this information for what felt like an eternity. Marcus could see other drones positioning themselves around the marketplace, ready to intervene if the situation escalated. Station security took a dim view of anything that disrupted the carefully regulated flow of commerce. Preliminary assessments require Ministry of Cultural Affairs approval, the drone finally announced. Current assessment shows no such approval on file. Then perhaps, said a new voice from behind them, we should rectify that oversight. Everyone turned to see a figure approaching through the crowd. It was another human, but this one wore the crisp uniform of a station authority supervisor. Her badge identified her as Sarah Okafor, Deputy Administrator for Cultural Affairs. Marcus felt his heart sink, assuming this was the end of whatever protection Lirelai had tried to provide. Administrator Okafor, the security drone acknowledged with a slight dip of its hovering position. This unit was responding to unlicensed gathering complaint. Sarah walked directly to Marcus and extended her hand, pulling him to his feet with surprising strength. Her smile was warm, but her eyes held a warning that only he could see. Mr. Chen has been operating under emergency cultural preservation protocols, she announced to the drone. As the last known practitioner of pre-diaspora Earth musical traditions, his activities fall under protected status according to Galactic Cultural Heritage Statute 1247. The drone's sensors focused on her with mechanical intensity. No record of such status designation exists in current databases. Because it was classified as a special case pending review by the High Council, Sarah replied without missing a beat. The review has just been completed. I'm here to deliver the official authorization. She produced a data pad from her uniform and transmitted something to the security drone. Marcus watched as the machine's scanning lights shifted from threatening red to neutral blue. Whatever Sarah had sent, it was apparently convincing enough to satisfy the drone's programming. Authorization confirmed, the drone announced. Cultural preservation activities approved for this sector. Dispersing security response. As the drones retracted into their ceiling alcoves, Sarah turned to address the small group of Catherians who were still sitting on the deck. Her expression was professional but friendly. I trust Mr. Chen's consultation services have been satisfactory, she asked Lirelai with just a hint of amusement in her voice. Lirelai's biosuit displayed patterns of confusion and growing respect. Most illuminating, she replied carefully. We were just beginning to understand the complexity of human cultural expressions. Marcus looked between Sarah and Lirelai, trying to understand what had just happened. The deputy administrator caught his expression and winked almost imperceptibly. Then perhaps, Sarah continued, we should discuss extending this consultation arrangement. I believe there's much more that our species could learn from each other. 3 hours later, Marcus found himself in a situation he could never have imagined when he had woken up that morning. He sat in the Catherian Trade Consortium's exclusive station lounge, his weathered guitar looking distinctly out of place among the flowing bioluminescent furniture and crystalline art installations. Lirelai had insisted on the meeting, claiming she needed to complete her cultural assessment before filing any official reports. Her companions sat nearby, their biosuits still displaying the unusual color patterns that had emerged during Marcus's performance. They kept touching their skin in wonder, as if trying to understand what had happened to their emotional regulation systems. Sarah Okafor sat across from Marcus, nursing a cup of something that steamed with alien herbs. She had shed her official administrator persona, and now watched the proceedings with the amused interest of someone enjoying an elaborate joke at bureaucracy's expense. I have to ask, Marcus said quietly, leaning toward Sarah. What exactly did you send to that security drone? Because I'm pretty sure there's no such thing as emergency cultural preservation protocols. Sarah's grin was decidedly unprofessional. There is now. Amazing what you can accomplish with administrative access and a gift for creative writing. The High Council won't review that classification for another 6 months, and by then, we'll have plenty of documentation to make it legitimate. We? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. I know enough, Sarah replied, her expression growing more serious. I know you're Marcus Chen, former professor of ethnomusicology at New Geneva University. I know you were on the research vessel Harmony when it was destroyed by pirates 3 months ago. And I know you've been living rough ever since because your insurance claim is tied up in interstellar legal proceedings. Marcus stared at her in amazement. How did you... Because I make it my business to know about humans on this station, Sarah interrupted. There aren't many of us left, and we have to look out for each other. Besides, I heard your music yesterday when I was passing through the marketplace. It reminded me of home. Before Marcus could respond, Lyreley approached their table with the graceful movement typical of her species. Her biosuit had settled into a steady pattern of deep blues and silvers that Marcus was beginning to recognize as contemplative colors. Mr. Chen, she said formally, I would like to commission a series of cultural consultations. My consortium is interested in understanding human artistic expressions and their potential applications in our business operations. The young Cytherian male joined them, his excitement evident in the rapid cycling of his biosuit patterns. Lyreley, the emotional resonance readings were unprecedented. If we could understand the mechanisms behind human music, we might be able to enhance our own cultural products exponentially. Marcus felt a familiar wariness creep into his expression. Throughout human history, art had been commodified and stripped of meaning by those who saw it only as a product to be sold. The last thing he wanted was to help the Cytherians turn music into another commercial enterprise. What kind of applications? He asked carefully. Lyreley seemed to sense his hesitation. She sat across from him, her biosuit shifting to colors that Marcus had learned indicated sincerity and openness. Nothing exploitative, she assured him. But what happened today? It changed something in us. Our emotional regulators have been malfunctioning ever since your performance. We are experiencing feelings and sensations that our technology was specifically designed to suppress. And that's a good thing? Sarah asked with professional interest. The young Cytherian nodded enthusiastically. It's extraordinary. For the first time in my life, I feel complete, as if some essential part of my being that I never knew was missing has suddenly been restored. Our entire society is built on emotional efficiency, Lyreley explained. We eliminated unpredictable feelings generations ago because they interfered with logical decision-making and profit optimization. But now I'm wondering if we lost something vital in the process. Marcus studied their faces, seeing something he had not expected. These were not alien beings looking to exploit human culture for financial gain. These were people who had just discovered they were capable of experiencing beauty, and they were struggling to understand what that meant. Music isn't a product, he said slowly. It's not something you can analyze and reproduce and sell. It's a living thing that exists in the moment it's created and dies when it stops. The magic isn't in the notes themselves, it's in the connection between the performer and the audience. Then teach us to create that connection, Lyreley said with surprising intensity. Not as a business venture, but as something our people need to know. Something we need to remember. Sarah leaned back in her chair, watching the exchange with growing interest. This could be bigger than you think, Marcus. If the Cytherians are questioning their emotional suppression technology, it might represent a fundamental shift in their civilization. Marcus picked up his guitar and absently tuned one of the strings. The simple sound rang out in the sophisticated lounge like a voice from another world, causing several other Cytherian patrons to turn and stare. There's something I need you to understand, he said, his fingers finding a gentle melody. Human music isn't just about entertainment or even emotional expression. It's about connection. It's about recognizing that despite all our differences, species, culture, technology, we share something fundamental. As he played, Marcus noticed that the alien conversations in the lounge were gradually growing quieter. Beings who had been discussing trade, agreements, and shipping schedules were instead listening to the simple human melody that was filling the space around them. It's about remembering that we're all part of something larger than ourselves, Marcus continued, his voice blending with the music. Something that transcends profit margins and efficiency ratings and social hierarchies. The biosuits of every Cytherian in the lounge had begun to display the same unprecedented color patterns that Marcus had first witnessed in the marketplace. But this time, instead of confusion or alarm, he saw wonder and recognition in their faces. "This is what we lost," Lirelai whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This sense of belonging to something beautiful." Marcus smiled and continued to play, watching as the rigid boundaries between species and social classes began to dissolve around them. "Then maybe it's time to help you find it again." 3 hours later, Marcus found himself in a situation he could never have imagined when he had woken up that morning. He sat in the Cytherian Trade Consortium's exclusive station lounge, his weathered guitar looking distinctly out of place among the flowing bioluminescent furniture and crystalline art installations. Lirali had insisted on the meeting, claiming she needed to complete her cultural assessment before filing any official reports. Her companions sat nearby, their biosuits still displaying the unusual color patterns that had emerged during Marcus's performance. They kept touching their skin in wonder, as if trying to understand what had happened to their emotional regulation systems. Sarah Okafor sat across from Marcus, nursing a cup of something that steamed with alien herbs. She had shed her official administrator persona, and now watched the proceedings with the amused interest of someone enjoying an elaborate joke at bureaucracy's expense. "I have to ask," Marcus said quietly, leaning toward Sarah. "What exactly did you send to that security drone? Because I'm pretty sure there's no such thing as emergency cultural preservation protocols." Sarah's grin was decidedly unprofessional. "There is now. Amazing what you can accomplish with administrative access and a gift for creative writing. The High Council won't review that classification for another 6 months, and by then, we'll have plenty of documentation to make it legitimate." "We?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Sarah replied, her expression growing more serious. "I know you're Marcus Chen, former professor of ethnomusicology at New Geneva University. I know you were on the research vessel Harmony when it was destroyed by pirates 3 months ago. And I know you've been living rough ever since because your insurance claim is tied up in interstellar legal proceedings." Marcus stared at her in amazement. "How did you—" "Because I make it my business to know about humans on this station," Sarah interrupted. "There aren't many of us left, and we have to look out for each other. Besides, I heard your music yesterday when I was passing through the marketplace. It reminded me of home." Before Marcus could respond, Lirelai approached their table with the graceful movement typical of her species. Her biosuit had settled into a steady pattern of deep blues and silvers that Marcus was beginning to recognize as contemplative colors. "Mr. Chen," she said formally, "I would like to commission a series of cultural consultations. My consortium is interested in understanding human artistic expressions and their potential applications in our business operations." The young Cytherian male joined them, his excitement evident in the rapid cycling of his biosuit patterns. "Lirelai, the emotional resonance readings were unprecedented. If we could understand the mechanisms behind human music, we might be able to enhance our own cultural products exponentially." Marcus felt a familiar wariness creep into his expression. Throughout human history, art had been commodified and stripped of meaning by those who saw it only as a product to be sold. The last thing he wanted was to help the Cytherians turn music into another commercial enterprise. "What kind of applications?" he asked carefully. Lirelai seemed to sense his hesitation. She sat across from him, her biosuit shifting to colors that Marcus had learned indicated sincerity and openness. "Nothing exploitative," she assured him. "But what happened today? It changed something in us. Our emotional regulators have been malfunctioning ever since your performance. We are experiencing feelings and sensations that our technology was specifically designed to suppress." "And that's a good thing?" Sarah asked with professional interest. The young Cytherian nodded enthusiastically. "It's extraordinary. For the first time in my life, I feel complete, as if some essential part of my being that I never knew was missing has suddenly been restored. Our entire society is built on emotional efficiency," Lirelai explained. "We eliminated unpredictable feelings generations ago because they interfered with logical decision-making and profit optimization. But now I'm wondering if we lost something vital in the process. Marcus studied their faces, seeing something he had not expected. These were not alien beings looking to exploit human culture for financial gain. These were people who had just discovered they were capable of experiencing beauty, and they were struggling to understand what that meant. Music isn't a product, he said slowly. It's not something you can analyze and reproduce and sell. It's a living thing that exists in the moment it's created and dies when it stops. The magic isn't in the notes themselves, it's in the connection between the performer and the audience. Then teach us to create that connection, Lyrelei said with surprising intensity, not as a business venture, but as something our people need to know, something we need to remember. Sarah leaned back in her chair, watching the exchange with growing interest. This could be bigger than you think, Marcus. If the Catherians are questioning their emotional suppression technology, it might represent a fundamental shift in their civilization. Marcus picked up his guitar and absently tuned one of the strings. The simple sound rang out in the sophisticated lounge like a voice from another world, causing several other Catherian patrons to turn and stare. "There's something I need you to understand," he said, his fingers finding a gentle melody. "Human music isn't just about entertainment or even emotional expression. It's about connection. It's about recognizing that despite all our differences, species, culture, technology, we share something fundamental." As he played, Marcus noticed that the alien conversations in the lounge were gradually growing quieter. Beings who had been discussing trade, agreements, and shipping schedules were instead listening to the simple human melody that was filling the space around them. "It's about remembering that we're all part of something larger than ourselves," Marcus continued, his voice blending with the music. "Something that transcends profit margins and efficiency ratings and social hierarchies." The biosuits of every Catherian in the lounge had begun to display the same unprecedented color patterns that Marcus had first witnessed in the marketplace. But this time, instead of confusion or alarm, he saw wonder and recognition in their faces. "This is what we lost," Lyrelei whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This sense of belonging to something beautiful." Marcus smiled and continued to play, watching as the rigid boundaries between species and social classes began to dissolve around them. "Then maybe it's time to help you find it again." The synthetic investigator extended a restraint field generator, its chrome fingers moving with mechanical precision toward Marcus. But before the device could activate, something unprecedented happened that would be recorded in Galactic Council archives for centuries to come. Every being in the cargo bay began to sing. It started with Lyrelei, her voice carrying the musical quality natural to her species, but transformed by her newfound emotional depth. The young Catherian male joined her, his biosuit blazing with colors that had no names in any galactic database. Commander Thrax's deep bass rumble added a foundation that made the deck plating vibrate with sympathetic harmonics. The Mallory researchers began pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that somehow translated into melody, while the Vorthok clicked their crystalline limbs in perfect rhythm. Even the station's synthetics, drawn by the unprecedented sounds, began modulating their mechanical processes to add electronic harmonies to the growing chorus. The synthetic investigator froze, its optical sensors flickering as it tried to process what was happening. The ethereal investigator's translucent form rippled with confusion as telepathic feedback from dozens of minds created a psychic symphony that overwhelmed its ability to maintain emotional detachment. Marcus stood at the center of the impossible choir, his guitar forgotten in his hands as he listened to the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It was not just music. It was proof that despite their vast differences, the species of the galaxy shared something fundamental that transcended biology and evolution. "Stop this immediately," the ethereal commanded, but its telepathic voice wavered with uncertainty. "You are demonstrating precisely the kind of cultural contamination that threatens galactic stability." The singing grew louder, and more beings entered the cargo bay to join their voices to the chorus. Sarah stood beside Marcus, tears streaming down her face as she watched representatives of a dozen species creating harmony together. Station workers abandoned their posts. Merchants left their negotiations. Even high-ranking diplomats from various embassies came to see what was happening. "No," Marcus said quietly, but his voice somehow carried over the music. "They're demonstrating that your definition of stability is built on fear. He began to play his guitar, weaving the human melody through the alien harmonies like a thread connecting all the disparate voices into a single unified song. As he did, he spoke words that would be quoted by philosophers and revolutionaries for generations. You're afraid because you think unity means the end of diversity. But listen to this music. Each voice is different. Each species brings something unique. The Grokan strength, the Catherian sophistication, the Molari precision, the Vorthak crystal clarity. They're all still there. But now they're part of something larger. The synthetic investigator's optical sensors began to flicker in what could only be described as mechanical confusion. Its programming had no protocols for dealing with voluntary cooperation on this scale. The restraint field generator in its hand powered down as competing directives crashed through its decision matrices. This is impossible, the ethereal investigator transmitted, but its mental voice now carried harmonics that suggested it was being affected by the music, despite its best efforts to remain detached. Evolutionary psychology clearly demonstrates that interspecies cooperation beyond basic trade agreements is unsustainable. Commander Thrak stepped forward without breaking his rhythm in the song. His massive form towered over both investigators, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. Perhaps your psychology is wrong. Perhaps we evolved not to compete, but to find our place in a larger harmony. The cargo bay was now filled to capacity with beings from across the galaxy, all of them singing together in a language that required no translation. The music had become self-sustaining, flowing from voice to voice and species to species like a river finding its way to the ocean. Lyrelay approached the ethereal investigator, her biosuit displaying patterns of compassion and understanding. You are afraid of losing control, but control was never the answer. Connection is. As if to demonstrate her point, she began singing directly to the ethereal, her voice carrying melodies that seemed designed specifically to resonate with the investigator's unique physiology. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ethereal's form began to pulse in rhythm with the music. The transformation was subtle at first, then increasingly obvious as the ancient being's natural defenses crumbled under the assault of pure, unconditional harmony. For the first time in its millennia of existence, the ethereal began to experience what other species called emotion. I can feel, the ethereal transmitted, its mental voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. This sensation? Is this what you call happiness? Marcus smiled and adjusted his playing to welcome the ethereal's unique contribution to the growing symphony. It's what we call belonging. The synthetic investigator stood motionless for several long moments, its sensors recording everything but its processors, unable to categorize the data meaningfully. Finally, in a moment that would be analyzed by artificial intelligence researchers for decades, it spoke with something that sounded almost like wonder. Logic dictates that this level of cooperation should be impossible, but observation confirms its reality. Conclusion: previous assumptions about interspecies relationships require fundamental revision. The music reached a crescendo that seemed to encompass the entire station. In the marketplaces, trading floors, and diplomatic quarters, beings stopped their normal activities to listen to the impossible symphony emerging from Cargo Bay 7. Some began to hum along. Others started moving to the rhythm. A few brave souls abandoned their posts entirely to join the gathering. As the song finally came to its natural conclusion, the silence that followed was not empty but full of potential. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species stood together in a space that had been designed for storing freight, looking at each other with new understanding. The synthetic investigator was the first to speak. This unit requests permission to file a supplemental report recommending immediate revision of species preservation protocols. The ethereal investigator rippled with what Marcus now recognized as laughter. The Galactic Council will never believe what happened here. Then maybe, Marcus said, shouldering his guitar with a smile, it's time for the Council to come and hear it for themselves. 6 months later, Marcus Chen stood before the full assembly of the Galactic Council, no longer a vagrant but the first official ambassador for interspecies cultural exchange. Behind him sat representatives from every major species, all of them united by their shared understanding that the universe was far more beautiful when experienced together rather than apart. The music had indeed changed everything, not by eliminating the differences between species, but by celebrating them as parts of a larger symphony that no one could create alone. And in the end, that simple truth proved more powerful than all the fear and isolation that had previously defined galactic civilization. The last entry in Marcus's journal from that period read simply, "Today I learned that sometimes the best way to save the galaxy is to remind it how to sing." The news reached the Galactic Council chambers on Centris Prime exactly 1 week after Marcus's impromptu concert in his quarters. High Counselor Vexithera, an ancient ethereal whose species had guided interstellar politics for over 1,000 years, read the intelligence report with growing disbelief. A human vagrant is teaching music to aliens and causing widespread behavioral modifications? The High Counselor's telepathic voice echoed in the minds of the assembled council members. This cannot be accurate. Ambassador Ralneth, representing the Vorthak hegemony, clicked his crystalline limbs in agitation. The reports are confirmed by multiple independent sources. Zephyr Station is experiencing unprecedented levels of interspecies cooperation. Trade disputes that have lasted decades are being resolved through collaborative meetings that feature human musical performances. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Zephyr Station was a critical hub in the galactic economy, notorious for its cutthroat competition and species-based segregation. If humans could somehow transform that environment, the political ramifications would be staggering. Meanwhile, back on Zephyr Station, Marcus was oblivious to the attention he had attracted at the highest levels of galactic government. He was too busy trying to understand what was happening to the station around him. The marketplace where he had once sat alone was now the site of daily gatherings. Beings who had never spoken to each other were forming impromptu musical groups. A Grokan percussion ensemble had somehow developed a collaboration with a Vorthak harmony choir. Even the synthetics had begun modulating their mechanical sounds to complement the organic music being created around them. "It's spreading," Sarah observed as they watched a group of young Catherians teaching traditional folk songs to a fascinated audience of Malari researchers. "Whatever you started, it's becoming self-sustaining." Marcus tuned his guitar, preparing for another session with the growing group of beings who came to his quarters each day. The space had become too small, so they had moved to an unused cargo bay that someone had converted into an impromptu concert hall. "I didn't start anything," Marcus protested. "I just played music. They're the ones who decided to listen." "Don't be modest," Lorelei said, her biosuit displaying patterns of affection and respect. "What you've done here is revolutionary. My consortium's latest reports show that productivity on the station has actually increased by 12%, even though beings are spending hours each day in musical activities." Commander Thrak nodded his massive head in agreement. "My soldiers report similar phenomena. Unit cohesion has improved dramatically since they began participating in what they call harmony training." The success was intoxicating, but Marcus felt a growing sense of unease that he couldn't quite identify. Something felt wrong about the way the music was being embraced so completely by beings who had never shown interest in such things before. His concerns proved justified when the first delegation arrived from the Galactic Council. The ship docked at Zephyr Station without fanfare, but Marcus knew immediately that something significant had happened. Sarah burst into the cargo bay where he was leading a mixed-species choir through a complex arrangement of Earth's classical symphonies. "We have a problem," she announced, her usual calm demeanor cracked with worry. "Council investigators are here. They're asking questions about unregulated cultural contamination and potential violations of the species preservation protocols." The assembled musicians fell silent, their various forms of expression, biosuits, bioluminescence, chemical emissions, all shifting to patterns of fear and confusion. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the full implications hit him. "They think I'm contaminating alien cultures," he said quietly. "They think humans are spreading some kind of cultural disease." The first investigator to enter the cargo bay was a synthetic, its chrome body reflecting the improvised lighting with mechanical perfection. Its optical sensors swept across the gathered beings with clinical precision before focusing on Marcus. Human designation: Marcus Chen, the synthetic announced in a voice devoid of emotion. "You are under investigation for violation of Galactic Council Resolution 847, prohibited cultural interference. You will submit to interrogation immediately, On what grounds? Sarah demanded, stepping protectively in front of Marcus. Mr. Chen has broken no laws. His activities fall under approved cultural exchange protocols. A second investigator entered, this one an ethereal whose translucent form rippled with barely contained energy. When it spoke, its telepathic voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The evidence suggests systematic cultural contamination on an unprecedented scale. Multiple species are exhibiting behaviors contrary to their evolutionary programming. This constitutes a clear threat to galactic stability. Lyrelai rose from her position in the choir, her biosuit blazing with indignant patterns. Threat? Commander, what we have experienced here is the opposite of a threat. For the first time, in our history, the various species of this station are working together in true harmony. Precisely the problem, the ethereal replied. Each species evolved specific behavioral patterns for survival reasons. Homogenization of these behaviors could lead to the collapse of the natural competitive systems that maintain galactic equilibrium. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. This was the same argument that had been used to justify human exile after the loss of Earth. Humans were too cooperative, too willing to share their culture and technology. They were seen as a destabilizing influence that threatened the careful balance of interstellar civilization. Commander Thrax stepped forward, his massive form dwarfing even the synthetic investigator. You speak of natural competitive systems, but what Marcus has shown us is that cooperation can be more powerful than competition. My warriors are stronger when they work in harmony rather than simply following orders. Your warriors are compromised, the ethereal responded coldly. Their programming has been altered by exposure to human cultural influences. They are no longer reliably Groken. The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Marcus realized, with growing horror, that he was watching the same fear-based thinking that had led to humanity's isolation being applied to his new friends. They're still Groken, Marcus said, standing up slowly. They're just Grokens who have learned that strength doesn't always have to mean domination. The synthetic's optical sensors focused on him with laser intensity. You admit to deliberately altering the behavioral patterns of non-human species. I admit to sharing music, Marcus replied, meeting the machine's gaze without flinching. If that's a crime, then I guess I'm guilty. As the investigators prepared to arrest him, Marcus realized that this moment would determine not just his own fate, but the future of everything they had built together on Zephyr Station. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for the kind of unity that music could create, or whether fear would once again triumph over harmony.